Hi, I'm Mark, and we do have to talk about Brexit again today, like yesterday, many other days. The political and economic chaos in Great Britain has one major cause, and that is Brexit. Its negative consequences were hushed up in public for a long time, but that is currently changing. The dispute over Brexit rules for the British region of the Emerald Isle is becoming a stress test for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. The Times reported on Tuesday, citing insiders, that members of Sunak's cabinet are preparing to resign in the event that the planned deal with the EU does not meet their expectations. The BBC programme Newsnight also said on Monday evening that at least one member of the government was considering resigning. The anger in the arch-conservative wing of the Tories, or the right-wing extremists, is sparked, among other things, by the fact that if an agreement is reached with Brussels, Sunak would give up a draft law that would allow London to arbitrarily or unilaterally terminate the so-called Northern Ireland Protocol. The agreement was actually expected at the beginning of this week. The protocol negotiated with the Brexit deal, and signed by Boris Johnson, by the way, ensures that Northern Ireland will continue to follow the rules of the EU internal market and the customs union despite Brexit. This is intended to prevent checks at the border with EU member Ireland and thus a resurgence of old conflicts in the former Civil War region. However, this has indeed created trade barriers for goods between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Not only MP and arch-Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg is reminded of the times of Theresa May, whose government negotiated a deal with the EU several times in 2018 and 19, but was unable to push through at home. However, there are differences now. For one thing, neither London nor Brussels have officially confirmed that there is any agreement at all on reforming the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol in the Brexit Treaty, or not even reforming, but differences of using it. On the other hand, it's unclear whether critics in Parliament could throw Rishi Sunak's government into serious difficulties. A compromise between London and Brussels on the controversial Northern Ireland Protocol was considered as good as decided. But now the Brexit hardliners in the Tories are openly threatening Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. So will there be a rift within the ruling party? I mean, more than anyway. Actually, Rishi Sunak's hour should come now. For weeks now, the British Prime Minister has been holding talks with the EU behind closed doors. And it is about Brexit again. And to be more precise, it is the Northern Ireland Protocol of the Brexit agreement. The Brexit hardliners in the Tories and the pro-British unionists from the so-called Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP in Northern Ireland, are particularly bothered by this. A compromise with Brussels should finally put the tiresome issue to rest. It should be Sunak's first notable success since becoming Prime Minister in October. The British public knows the Prime Minister, or he knows that the public will be behind the Prime Minister. And according to surveys, the majority of Britons wants a closer relationship with the EU. Just a few days ago, everything still looked like there would be an agreement. Over the weekend, more and more details about the possible compromise became known, which, according to insiders, should have been largely negotiated 2 weeks ago. Sunak was supposed to present the deal with Brussels to his cabinet on Tuesday, as I already said a few days ago, and according to the London political rumour mill. Tuesday came, and what happened? Nothing. Because the same forces that have stood in the way of a long-term solution to the problems for years could also prevent an agreement this time. There is even talk of possible ministerial resignations, as I said, and the outbreak of a civil war within the Tory party. Sunak's Downing Street office said on Tuesday that there were unresolved issues in the talks with the EU. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly was due to hold another video call later that afternoon with Maroš Šefčovič, the EU Commission Vice President responsible for all Brexit issues. As is so often the case in negotiations, Sunak's spokesman continued, the long-term problems would only be addressed when you get to that point. That's not unusual. So there's nothing to see. Please move on. In reality, the Brexit hardliners among the Tories, whom Sunak apparently deliberately kept in the dark about his negotiations, may have messed up a quick negotiation success, at least for the time being. A stark warning came from the government itself on Monday from Home Secretary Suella Braverman. She is quite a controversial right-wing figure in the Tory party who, apparently unsuccessfully, was installed by Sunak in a bid to win favour with Brexit hardliners. Braverman warned Sunak against overturning a proposed law that would allow London to unilaterally withdraw from the Northern Ireland Protocol, which would be against international law, by the way, but since when do they care? From the point of the view of the lawyer Braverman, the fact that Great Britain would thereby break international law is apparently not a problem. As expected, the draft law caused a great deal of uneasiness in Brussels. Its withdrawal is likely to be one of the EU's conditions for a revised Northern Ireland Protocol. So it's no wonder that the Brexit hardliners are using this very law to torpedo Sunak's plan for a deal with the EU. Additional criticism came, of course, from Jacob Rees-Mogg, another influential Brexit hardliner. He on Tuesday accused Sunak of acting like former Prime Minister Theresa May on the Northern Ireland Protocol negotiations by failing to consult the DUP and the right-wing Tory party beforehand on a possible compromise. That was an unmistakable warning. After all, the Brexit hardliners and the DUP brought about Theresa May's downfall by voting against her Brexit deal. And another old acquaintance who has often used Brexit as a career springboard in the past also spoke up, Boris Johnson. He let a confidant spread over the weekend that he thought it would be a huge mistake to overturn the law that would allow London to repeal parts of the Northern Ireland Protocol unilaterally. After all, they could put pressure on Brussels about it, or with it. Johnson, who fell over the summer over a never-ending series of scandals, has clearly been working on his return to the post of Prime Minister for weeks or even months. The gifted self-promoter with a penchant for untruths even made a surprise trip to Kiev recently against the government's express request. That Johnson, of all people, could use the Northern Ireland Protocol to torpedo Sunak could not be more ironic. After all, the protocol is part of the Brexit agreement, which Johnson personally signed and praised to the heavens in December 2020. Johnson had apparently promised opponents of the protocol that he would tear it up once the deal was in place. That's what a DUP politician later explained. Since that didn't happen, resentment within the DUP and on the far right of the Tory party has increased noticeably in recent months. For this reason, the DUP has even been boycotting the Northern Irish regional government for a year, in which, according to the peace agreement, the largest Unionist and Republican party have to share power. As a result, the region has had no government since then, because the Northern Ireland Protocol ensured that Northern Ireland remained in the EU internal market for goods after Brexit. From a customs point of view, the region will continue to be treated as if it were part of the European Customs Union. This was to prevent a reintroduction of a border between the north of the Emerald Isle and the rest of the Emerald Isle, which is still in the EU, and which would be out of the question for pro-Irish Republicans. The problem, this border now effectively runs between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK, but just for goods. I always have to emphasize this. And this is absurd for both the Northern Irish Unionists and the Brexit hardliners. Well, reality is absurd for them. The Brexit hardliners and the Tories also reject any role of the European Court of Justice in question affecting Northern Ireland. Brussels has until recently insisted that the EU's top court should have jurisdiction over disputes affecting the single market, and that too in Northern Ireland. A compromise there might be difficult, and a real compromise will not happen there, I'm sure. The opposition is benefiting from the ongoing bickering among the Tories, though. The Labour Party has been so far ahead in polls for months that the divided Tories could all but disappear as a political force in a new election. And the party even increased recently. And their boss Keir Starmer got involved in the dispute with a clever move. He offered Sunak his support if he should submit a possible Northern Ireland deal with Brussels to Parliament for approval. In doing so, Starmer not only let the British know in a public way that Labour is not to blame for the ongoing Brexit wrangling. He also made Sunak look like a weak prime minister who has no control over his own party. An early normalization of relations with the EU should also facilitate Starmer's planned rapprochement with the EU if Labour wins the upcoming election as expected. So Sunak's only ways are no deal with the EU if the Tory hardliners do what they do, or getting a deal through Parliament with the votes of the opposition. But then I don't know how, if in sight of the polls and in sight of the expected election result to come in the end of 24, the beginning of 25, they haven't scheduled the elections yet. Do the other members of the Tory group in Parliament care enough about what the Brexit hardliners still want? Do the Brexit hardliners have constituencies they would keep even in this devastating blow? I mean, Boris Johnson, I talked about this yesterday, is trying to get a safer one than he had before. But if that would be enough to get back into Parliament and with polls like this, well, I do have my doubts. But do they care enough about the Brexit hardliners and a possible rebellion now that they will side with the hardliners to overthrow Sunak if they all will lose their posts in the next election? And that will be the interesting part when this issue with the negotiations and the compromise with the EU have to be solved in Parliament. And that will be a very interesting point. There's people that are not Brexit hardliners themselves, but they are siding with them all the time, just, power reasons, post reasons, you know how that works. But with an eye on the next election, will they still side with them? Because all of them should know who they have to thank for probably losing their seat in Parliament. So I'm looking forward to new news about the negotiations with the EU and how Sunak will deal with it. But as I often said, we will talk a lot about Brexit in the next days as well, and in the next weeks and months and years. And I'll see you in my next video. I'll be back.